Welcome, and thank you for joining us here today. I am very excited this morning to be introducing Ryan Hawk. Ryan works on my team in the specialized legal markets. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Dustin Kim. I'm responsible for our specialized legal markets team here at Lexis. So specialized legal markets includes small law firms, state and local government agencies, and small to mid corporate legal departments. Ryan works with me on my team in the small law space. But before I get into Ryan, there's lots to say about Ryan, but before I get into Ryan, I just want to thank Women's Connected. Women's Connected, for those of you who are not active members, Women's Connected is a wonderful and important group here at Lexis. They are committed to furthering the development of our female professionals, but they're not just about tackling women's issues. They're about developing leadership skills in every single one of us here at Lexis. So thank you for joining Women's Connected today. I think that you will be happy that you invested your time with us here this morning. In honor of Women's Connected, I have to give another shout out. Who here knows that it is International Women's Day today? Show of hands if you knew that. Surprise! It's International Women's Day today. I must confess, I myself was not aware of that. I got a text from my father this morning and it said, Happy International Women's Day, and then like 9 emojis. I think he just discovered emojis. And then he wrote, hashtag Pledge for Parity. So it turns out that the theme of International Women's Day today is all about achieving parity in the workforce. So in the drive over here this morning, I started thinking about parity in the workforce. And your mind wanders in many different directions as you're thinking about big, weighty topics. So a lot of what I initially started to think about were systemic issues, things like training and education, work-life balance, equal opportunity. And then I kind of got to a point of feeling frozen, as I think many of us often do when you think about really big, weighty issues. So then I started to think about, okay, what can we do as individuals to help achieve our own path to parity? What can we do as individuals to support our own professional growth and to accelerate our own careers? And that tied quite nicely into the theme of what Ryan and Lance are going to be talking about here today, which is how to leave your mark. The best thing that we can do as individuals for our own careers is to stand out, no matter what you're doing, no matter what department you work in, no matter what group you work in, stand out, be great, strive for excellence. And then from there, speak up. The only person who's really watching out for you is you. So somebody told me very early on in my career, don't be afraid to speak up. Tell people what your career aspirations are. Tell people what your goals are. So I often tell young women that I mentor, stand out and speak up. And so as we think about standing out and speaking up, there's no better person to lead us through a conversation on that than Ryan Hawk. Ryan knows, certainly, how to leave your mark. I've had the pleasure of working with Ryan for the last year quite closely. And Ryan, in my opinion, has a natural inclination towards leadership. He sort of naturally excels in that area. I think it showed up very early on in his life when he excelled in sports and rose to the quarterback rank for his team. Professionally, he has been with Lexis for about 11 years now, first as a sales professional, then as a sales leader, and now most recently as a segment leader on my team. When he was in sales, he won COE multiple times, sort of the crown jewel of making your mark and showing your impact. And now in the segment role, he has led several programs that have helped return us to growth. Ryan has a real knack, in my opinion, for honing in on what really matters a lot of times we can get really busy in the day-to-day. There's so many things that are on our plates, but he kind of quickly is able to figure out what's going to be the most impactful area to focus on, and then he really digs in that area. So one example is in small law last year, we launched something called the On-Ramp program, which essentially, I could talk about it for days, but in a nutshell, it's a program that helped us grow our business in the 1 to 10 attorney market where we had been in decline. And that program single-handedly returned us to new business growth, and Ryan was really the architect of that program. So huge kudos to him. He really stood out from a segment perspective last year with that. And Ryan doesn't just leave his mark professionally. He focuses on standing out outside of work as well. I don't know how many of you have watched the Learning Leader show, but it is a podcast series that Ryan started. He is truly a student of leadership. He is fascinated by leadership and is committed to it and passionate about it. And what he does on his show is he interviews leaders from all walks of life so that we can glean insights from their unique experiences. The show is regularly highly ranked in the new and noteworthy category, and they just passed their 100th episode milestone mark. So congratulations to Ryan on that. And as if that wasn't enough, Ryan is also a very involved father to 5 beautiful young girls. Honestly, I'm not quite sure how he does everything that he does. But I will say that I am very proud and grateful to have him on my team. And I think you'll all be grateful that you had the opportunity to spend the next hour and a half learning from him. So please join me in welcoming Ryan Hawk.
Dustin, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. But I think it's time that we get a little juice in this room. So everybody stand up, please. Get up, please. And the whole title, the purpose of doing this today is so that we, all of us, can leave our mark here at LexisNexis. And so I don't know who, I really appreciate those of you that did join us. But for everyone who didn't join us, they're going to regret it. And they're going to know that we are here. We're going to leave our mark to start this talk right now. So I want Sean Fitzpatrick on the 6th floor. I want the people in building 1. I want the people in building 6. I want the people in every building to know that we are in here today. So on the count of 3, I'm going to get everybody get up, raise your hands, and yell as loud as you possibly can. So if you need to envision something that makes you happy, that makes you excited, that's how we're going to start today. And I'm going to feel the energy bouncing off the walls. That's how I love to get these types of things started. So I want to see who can get the loudest. Maybe we'll give them a little prize. I see Jameson. I'm expecting you to be loud. Ronaldo, I know you're going to be loud. All right? Okay, you guys ready? Trip, you ready to go? All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Get up! Good. Thank you. That was pretty good. That was good. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you being here. Let's get it started. So my name is Ryan Hawk. For those who didn't hear a great intro, I appreciate that, Dustin. It means a lot to me, especially coming from my boss. But I am the husband of a great wife, Miranda, our 5 daughters, Brooklyn, Ella, Addison, Peyton, and Charlie. You see us. This is a typical day for us, everybody with unique, different personalities trying to do it. So I'm very fortunate to have a great support staff at home, and that's something I'm so grateful for, and it's my why. It's why I do what I do every single day. I want to tell you a quick story before I bring Lance up here that talks shares a little bit about why I wanted to start this podcast and reach out and learn from other people so that I could bring it to everyone here at Lexis. So I was fortunate to have a dinner set up with a guy by the name of Todd Wagner. Most of you have probably not heard of Todd. Todd started a company with Mark Cuban called Broadcast.com. And throughout this dinner, Todd was telling us the ins and outs, the ups and downs, everything that went into creating the business, growing the business, and eventually sitting face-to-face with the leaders at Yahoo. And this is when Yahoo was like Google. It was at their peak. Face-to-face with the leaders at Yahoo and convincing them to buy his company for $5.7 billion, immediately making him a billionaire overnight. A crazy story, inspired me. I loved it. I loved everything about what he said. And the problem was that I wish I had it recorded so I could share with all of my friends and other people instead of just retelling that story. So I decided to launch a podcast. It's called The Learning Leader Show. And what I do, Dustin mentioned it, I reach out to inspiring and empowering leaders from all over the world. I try to learn from them, publish for everybody to hear so that all of my friends and coworkers could learn along with me. And I've been fortunate to have good success, and we're going to talk about how that's helped me leave a mark and how it could help potentially everybody in this room leave their mark here at LexisNexis. I think it's time, though, that I bring up my good friend Lance Salyers, and let me tell you a little bit about Lance. Initially, when I was going to do this, I was just going to give an hour talk, and we would have a little bit of Q&A. And I thought maybe a better way, and Marion and Aaron thought this as well, a better way would be to bring somebody up that could flip the script and challenge me a little bit. And in my case, I chose Lance because I thought he would challenge me a lot. He's a guy who is a former prosecutor. He's put the worst people in the world behind bars for life. He's a guy that I met a few years ago when he came to Lexus, and I've been impressed with him every single day. He challenges me. He challenges everybody in this room. He always is challenging the status quo. I know Dustin has probably had a few phone calls with him saying, Lance, you need to chill out, dude. You're going a little bit too hard at this. Chill out if you want to keep your job. But I thought, what better way? There's a little bit of a gamble. It's a little bit of a risk to do it this way because I know Lance is a guy who's going to surprise me. He's going to challenge me. He's going to question me. And I thought, that's a great way for me to model what I'm trying to do here, and that's to push outside of our comfort zone, to leave our mark. And this is one way to do it. So please join me, Lance Salyers. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I was sitting back there, and I was thinking, man, it would have been nice to have AC/DC and a big scream to start a trial, right? And bring in the jury, and we're going to pump it up and have some Back in Black. That would be really cool. Maybe an Imperial theme march. Here's what we want to do today. This is not intended to be where you watch an interview, right? Ryan and I sit in his office, stand in his office and do a lot of just talking, and I'm drawing on the whiteboard and he's taking notes and then he's asking questions and I walk out going, I don't know. And that's what we're hoping we will be able to generate for you guys, and we want you to participate. We want this to be as much an organic conversation as possible. So Aaron and Marion have microphones. We're not really looking to have a Q&A at the end. What we'd like to have is throughout this conversation as we move through some topics. When you hear something, when you see an opportunity, whether it's to raise a question, share a story, add some piece of your experience, please throw it up here. We hope we've calculated right to build time in for that so that we still get to where we need to go in 90 minutes, but we definitely want a participatory conversation rather than an interview, okay? Let me start with a question that's actually going to embarrass Ryan. How many of you have ever listened to an episode of The Learning Leader Show? Awesome. Because he said, well, what if nobody has? And I said, great. There's 200 more listeners for you, because they will after the end of this. The reason I asked that is because if you have listened to his show, you know that the beginning of every conversation with these leaders, and there's been over 100 of them now, he asks almost the same question, phrases it differently, but he's always looking for the same information, and that's this. You, whoever you are, that leader, as you've moved through life and you've bumped into other, whether you want to call them successful people, I know you refer to sustained excellence over a period of time, high achievers. What are some of the common characteristics that you have seen? And they all share them. So having been able to ask 100 or so leaders that, I want to ask you, what are some of the common answers that you've gotten from all these leaders?
A lot of people have different definitions of excellence and sustaining excellence. And so I think it's, first you have to define that for you and what that means for you. And for me, it means always striving to be great every single day, to only measure myself versus my previous self. So how was I yesterday? How am I today? How am I going to be tomorrow? So a few of the common themes that I've found from talking with over 100 of the best, I feel, in the world, first and foremost, they have an overwhelming sense of optimism. They just simply believe that it's going to work out. They always think, I'm going to go do this, whether I'm going to start this business, I'm going to start this big project, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to give speeches, whatever it is, it's going to go great. and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by this. When my dad is this way, my wife is this way, to have this overwhelming sense of optimism that things are just going to always go well. And I think those types of people also have a magnetic quality to them, where it's like, I just want to be around those types of people, and they seem to sustain excellence a lot. The other part that I found, and this is something too, when you talk to, I'm fortunate to be able to do some interviews, whether it's for leadership positions or for sales representative positions that I've done in the past. I've done hundreds of those. And one of the qualities that I love the most, and I found the most when I talk to these leaders, is that they're incredibly curious. They are always asking the question why. They're always seeking more. They always want to figure out, maybe there's a better way to do this. Dustin calls this people who want to tip the sacred cows. And I love that term, because she's thinking, why do we do things this way? Maybe we should do it a different way. They're questioning everything. And sometimes that can, you do this more than anybody knows. Sometimes that can be like great on people, and you can be polarizing, and I know that happens. But I think that's a quality in the best. They all share this curiosity. And then I think a third thing to add, as far as an action that these people I've found, they are massive readers. They are all so well read. There's so many good quotes about people, leaders or readers. Charlie Munger's quote, "I have never met a wise person who isn't a voracious reader." Never, ever. And so I think if you look at those types of those qualities, there's 100 of them, but I think those are 3 that I've picked out that seem to be really common amongst people who have sustained excellence.
Yeah, you mentioned optimism, and it reminds me of Seth Godin, who is somebody that you were able to interview.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about this notion of, you never hear people when they're faced with something they're about to try to undertake or to do, or some challenge, you never hear them say, with my luck, this is going to go awesome, right? They always say, with my luck, this is not going to work, right? And the people that you have kind of talked to and published and interacted with and introduced us all to, because a lot of these leaders, I know I did not know, there is that common thread of, well, with my luck, which they will call years of preparation, focused learning, it's going to go awesome.
Right.
And then when it doesn't work, I'll figure out the next way to make it awesome.
Exactly right.
Apart from these common responses, what were some of the responses you've gotten from your guests that in particular resonated with you, that really spoke to your own kind of fingerprint of success in your life?
I think they are constantly leveling up their life. And what I mean by that is they are surrounding themselves with people who push them, who drive them, who force them to stretch just a little bit. Not stretch a ton, because then it's not realistic, but just a little bit further. So they're finding and identifying people and then trying to be a part of those networks, so to speak, to level up. So you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. You just are. That's a fact. There's science behind that. So you're constantly trying to find the 5 best people to surround yourself with to level up your life. It doesn't mean you get rid of your old friends. You can still be loyal to them. It just means that you're going to steer a little bit more towards the people who could level up your life. Find those. That's what I try to actively do. That's why I want to have conversations with all these impressive people, because I feel like it's helped me level up my life in a number of different areas. And I think the people around me, I hope, would say that that's the case. The one other thing that I have to bring up, because it's so common, that I've implemented, is they have distinct morning routines. And they always wake up very early, and they always have some sort of routine that they do every single day. And this is particularly important for people who have kids, because that might be the only time all day that you get to yourself. So yes, it might mean not watching TV the night before, so that you could go to bed a little bit earlier, so that you could wake up earlier. And so for me personally, I know you're going to mention, what do? I wake up very early. I like to drink a big glass of water. I like to stretch to get my body to feel good. I think your body is very important. I like to read, and then I journal in something called the 5-minute journal, which I write in. It takes 5 minutes. 3 things that I'm grateful for, 3 things that would make today great, and then 3 positive affirmations to say, I am going to be a great leader today, or whatever it may be. And that simple exercise, doing it in the morning and doing it at night to review your day, has had a big impact on my life personally.
Yeah, I know that's an area that in particular you have challenged. You don't even know this. You have challenged me on because I count it a win in the morning if I'm up, and I get my wife and kids out the door by about 6:40 because she teaches all the way up in Beaver Creek and has a long drive. So if I get that done and have some coffee, I count it a win. And my boss works in New York, so usually I get to win more often than I probably should, right?
Yep.
But it has been challenging to, especially if anybody follows me on Twitter, I'm usually watching hockey like at midnight because all the stuff I'm interested in is on the left coast. And really challenging me to get up early and start carving out time to do these. I know you've interviewed Jim Tressel, and he talks about quiet time, of setting your mind right at the beginning of the day. What's one of these responses that you got from these leaders that in particular was, I don't want to say strange or weird, but certainly surprising, certainly I never thought of that, or kind of just hit you in a strange way?
I spoke with a guy by the name of Joey Coleman, who I think he gave a surprising answer, and I'm not sure I even agree with it, but it's made me think. Joey is a world-class speaker. He travels the country giving great talks all over the world. And one thing he told me is that some of the great leaders he's been around have the ability to be gentle on themselves. And I thought that was an interesting term because a lot of us are not. I don't think, I think it was a reminder to me that at times you might need to sit back and actually appreciate and enjoy some of the things that you've accomplished, because it's so easy to do something great, to win an award, to win whatever it may be, and then immediately, I think of a guy like Nick Saban, he's immediately thinking of the next day, or a reminder that those guys are that way. And so to me though, I think that's something we all could probably learn from. It's okay and it's necessary at times to be gentle on ourselves, to celebrate, to be happy, especially for the people around us, because it's worth it to celebrate those wins.
Let me talk about leadership here, which is obviously part of the branding of your podcast. It's obviously a reputation that you've built here. Simon Sinek, who I know you're a big fan of. In fact, I think you recently interviewed him, not yet released. Has this famous TED Talk, with Start With Why, that led to his book, and he's talking about the golden circle. But he has this wonderful quote that is in everybody's Facebook feed at some point, right? Which is, people don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it.
Yep.
So through your impact here, through your podcast, all things being equal, you're selling leadership.
Yep.
And so I remember when I walked into your office about a month ago, and I just wrote on the board, and this is the question I'd like to direct you today: why lead?
It's an interesting question because you don't really think about it, but you forced me to about a month ago. And so when I talked to Simon, I asked him that briefly. I said, why have you chosen this field of leadership to teach? And so I thought, there's probably not a better person on the planet to learn from. And he told me an interesting quote. I thought I would share it. He said, if you have a desire to see others succeed, that's why you lead. And I loved it. And to me, I have that desire. Now, I think part of it is I have this sense of obligation to do it as well. I've been surrounded by this since I can remember. I won the parent lottery. I really did. And I realized that I think as you grow up, you kind of learn if that's happened to you. And so I've been very fortunate to have that as from two parents, right? And then I grew up with some incredible coaches. My high school football coach, Ron Allery, had more of an effect on me than probably just about anybody in my life outside of my family. From a leading through, he empowered me, inspired me, and it created, I think, everything that I've become because from that groundwork he laid. And then I get to LexisNexis, and I'm surrounded by other phenomenal leaders. I currently work for one. I work on a team full of them. So I'm just surrounded by all this great leadership. I reach out to people. So there's an obligation, I think, to lead and want to see other people succeed. So I've been very fortunate in that regard to be surrounded by it and learn from others. The flip side of that, Lance, I think, is the fact that I've also, unfortunately, from time to time, spent time around really bad leaders. And unfortunately, probably everybody in this room has spent time around people who would be deemed as that. So think of somebody that you know, and hopefully they don't work here, but they might, maybe they used to, that was a was one of those types who somehow made it to a leadership position because they kissed up and they kicked down. Meaning if you talk to people who worked for them or around them, they would say poor things about them. If you talk to their boss, they would rave about them. So these people do a phenomenal job of kissing up and kicking down. And there is nothing that I despise more than these types of people. I hate those types of people. And so I feel, why lead? Because I don't want those types of people around me. I don't want them in this organization. And when they are, it's unfortunate. And so I think it's important to learn from both the great and to learn from also the people who aren't so great. When I started at Lexus in 2005, I kept a notebook. I still have it. I looked at it last night, actually, a notebook of all the things that I witnessed. I was just a sales rep. What did I love? What did I like? And what did I not like? And so I thought, okay, do these things and don't do these things. And that's kind of how I simplified my leadership strategy as I've progressed in this company.
It makes me think of when I came to Lexus. So this was not even yet 4 years ago. Prior to coming here, I had been, you mentioned as a prosecutor, I was in county government offices my whole first career. And I had a very narrow kind of really an impoverished notion of what leadership is. There were a couple times in my past before I got here that there was a leadership void that needed to be filled, and I didn't fill it because I said to myself, I don't want to be anybody's boss. That's what I thought being a leader meant. I don't want to be anybody's boss. I just want to do my own thing. I want to be responsible for myself. I don't want to be anybody's boss. And then I come here, and I'm surrounded by the things you were talking about with the last topic of these great leaders around us. And all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by this, kind of hypothetical 5 different types of people who see leadership in a much different way. And all of a sudden, I start to have my eyes opened. And so now, instead of being, the duck off screen that's bossing them to climb the curb here, leadership is about being that first one and risking looking like an idiot if you can't get up. And if that was a pull-up bar, I would look like the idiot who couldn't get up, right? But that's the role. And I really appreciate you not just talking about the positives, but the negative examples, right? Yep. If you are so obvious and out there with your podcast about learning, and you can't be that way if you only look to, I'm only going to look to the positive examples and learn from them. There's a lot of great learning if you will learn wherever it comes from. Negative examples, moments of failure. Is anybody here a pilot? Anybody have a pilot's license? Pilots do this all the time. Their pleasure reading, oddly enough, is NTSB crash reports, because that's how they learn, is to figure out what went wrong. You talked about your why for leadership as seeing other people succeed in it and having an impact, right? When I think of impact and I think about how leadership can create these impacts, they can chain reaction kind of down the line. I have an example that starts with your podcast. So I wasn't a podcast listener. You had started. You were probably 4 or 5 months down the road, and I was driving to Florida, and so I'm driving, and I've got 2 kids with their DVD iPad things going in the back, so I popped in some earbuds and said, let's listen to what Ryan's got. And I heard you talk to a guy named Jeff Goins. And by the time I had listened to a couple of them, your podcast started a chain reaction that I revisited what I used to love to do, which was blog, and I hadn't for 10 years. For a whole long old story, but your podcast caused a chain reaction, had an impact on me. I started blogging. A couple months later, I get an email from a guy that I went to high school with back in Colorado. We weren't close. He was a weak tie, like Adam Grant talks about in Give and Take. And he tells me that what I wrote on my blog caused him and his wife to start a business, like in Idaho. They've got a home cleaning business in Idaho. This chain reaction of podcast to blog to now, Idaho has a new cleaning business. And so I checked in with him prior to coming here. In September, when he started, their monthly revenue was $413. It's probably they're charging $350 or $103.25, right, per house. By February, they were up to $7,000.
Wow.
which was good because last Friday he was laid off from his regular job.
Ooh.
So you have this chain reaction of events that end up sending somebody into a direction they wouldn't have gone otherwise, and had they not, he would be ill prepared for what life was throwing at him. So with that kind of as a backdrop, talk to me a little bit about how that story impacts you with regard to your effort with this podcast.
I didn't know you were going to say that, so I know you're going to ask me. That's powerful, though, man. Like, I think what I love more than anything from seeking out knowledge from others to try to share it with the world and people here at Lexus, and there's a number of them in this room, when people stop me in the hallway and ask me about somebody I spoke to and something I learned, or the surprise in my voice, and maybe something they picked up on, they learned that they now implement into their job here at Lexus, which helps grow revenue here or helps them become a better leader. I mean, there's nothing better. I get emails. I'm fortunate to get emails from people from all over the world as well. So I think of like conversations I just had with the James Foley or David Dowd or Paul Specca, to have these incredible conversations that they've said, hey, I was listening to this and it made me think of this, and now I'm going to maybe tweak how I do this and approach this customer, something along those lines. It's crazy. I mean, to see that type of impact, I don't know if I was quite prepared for that, and I love it. I want more of it. I'm like, it's like addictive. You want more of that type of feedback. And I recently got an email about a month ago from a PhD student in Lisbon, Portugal. He's broke, and he's trying to make some money to pay for school. And
can he clean houses?
Yeah, probably. But I mean, so this is the thing. It's far and wide. This guy in Portugal. Now we converse back and forth all the time. He's also since creating a blog or a website that he's going to just review books. He thinks maybe that could create somehow some type of revenue for him while he's getting his PhD. A very bright guy. And so just to think, really, like when I started this thing, or I tried to go learn from other people, I would have never guessed that some 23-year-old kid in Lisbon, Portugal would match up with a 24-year-old or a 45-year-old leader here at LexisNexis to say the impact that it's had on them and how they can then go impact the world. And I'm not trying to talk, like sometimes when you say words like the world or impact the world, you're like, whoa, who does this guy think he is? But that's real. Like, and I think we're talking about trying to leave your mark. That's why we're here today. And I would love it if people do think that grand, if they do dream that big, to go and say, what's the one thing I could potentially be good at that could impact so many people? And if everybody had that mindset and they didn't think it was too grand or too big for them, dude, this would be a pretty powerful room to think of the things that could come from it. And so that's definitely part of my juice now as I keep this thing going.
It's funny you use that phrase, who does he think he is? Let's talk about fear.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a huge fan of Disney's Inside Out.
I was watching this morning with my daughter, Charlie.
Gosh, you do get up early.
Yeah.
Gracious. I mean, I was speeding to get here on time. But anyway, I still have FOP plates, so I can kind of get away with that. So Seth Godin, again, somebody you've interviewed, he talks about, I mean, there's all kinds of fears, right? There's fears of sticking out. There's fears of failing. There's fears of being rejected. But I want to ask you specifically about a very particular kind of fear. So Seth Godin describes it as the fear of being found out, of you try to do something, you go to make a dent, as Steve Jobs talked about, or you make a ruckus like Seth talks about, and somebody says, where do you get off? Who do you think you are? You don't belong here, right? You did a podcast with Amy Morin, who's a licensed clinical social worker, and she put a name to it. She called it the imposter syndrome, right? This really deep kind of emotional fear that we feel and often don't even know what to call it, that is specifically about getting in a position and now being asked to do something or stepping forward to do something, and then worrying that the people that were already there look at you like, you don't deserve to be doing this. Have you ever had that fear?
Every day, probably. I think for a long time. When Marion and Aaron came to me to do this today, it was my very first thought was, you're why? Like, that's crazy. And I felt like I didn't belong. And I think that's part of it. But I think this fear, it could go back many years. And probably, I think a lot of people can relate to this because it's important that we think about our fear, be a little bit vulnerable. Brene Brown has a great TED Talk that people should watch, talking about how embracing your vulnerabilities and understanding fear could help you. I mean, I think about when I was in 8th grade, I was going I started working out with a varsity team in the summer leading into my freshman year of high school, and I was very skinny and little, and for
Two words have never been applied to me.
For some reason, my coaches believed in me enough to bring me up with these guys and to say, hey, we want you to compete for this starting quarterback job when you're going to be this little 14-year-old freshman. And I thought it would be cool, to hopefully be on the team, and that would be neat. And maybe eventually I could play years later. And so I think, though, what I did when they believed in me is I put my head down, I prepared to play and do everything I could, and ended up winning that starting position as a freshman at Centerville High School, and then played for the 4 years. And I think for me, the best and only way I knew to deal with that fear was to prepare and to work more than anybody else, to simply put in the work and to be ready every single day so that when my opportunity came up, and it did right away, I was going to perform. I was going to be the guy. And fortunately, it happened that way. And so I think it wouldn't have happened, though, if the preparation wasn't there. And the same thing when I went from high school to college, competed against a guy by the name of Ben Roethlisberger. A lot of people in here know at Miami University. When I graduated from high school, I decided to move to Miami University the very next day. I was the only guy in my freshman class that lived at Miami over that summer break. Every other guy stayed home, played golf, went swimming, did whatever they did. I wanted to meet and know the name of every single player on my team going into my freshman year at Miami, because I knew I was competing against somebody who was world class, one of the best players in the country. I didn't know he was that good at that time, by the way. But I thought maybe
and sure, some Bengals fans here still don't think he's
yeah.
that good.
I don't know. But that was the only way to handle that fear, Lance, was to say, I'm going to be more prepared than the guy. Maybe he's more gifted than me, more talented than me, but I'm going to go into it being more prepared. My teammates are going to like me better. I'm going to do everything I possibly can. As most people probably can guess that watch sports, it did not work out for me at Miami because the guy simply was better than me. And sometimes that's life. I mean, that happens. As you get knocked down, you got to get back up. And so I think dealing with that fear is the same. The same thing when I came to LexisNexis. I got hired in 2005 straight out of college as a sales professional. And I mean, some people in this room know my dad's pretty good at the profession of selling. He's led a lot of people for a number of years. There's probably a little bit of pressure on the son of that guy to come in and be good. And so obviously I felt that. I still feel that every single day. And but the best way to deal with that fear was to come in on Saturday mornings with my first mentor, Aaron Campbell, and learn and figure out what's the best way to be the most prepared sales professional in this whole business so that I can win the circle of excellence that Dustin talked about. I can be at the top of those stack rankings so that I can potentially get promoted. So I think the best way any of us can deal with fear, which we all are going to have on a daily basis, is to prepare, is to work, is to put in the time. It's not rocket science when it comes to that. The problem is that's really hard. And it takes time, it takes effort, it takes sacrifice, maybe not doing other things that you like to do. But that's part of it. So for me, if I had to put it in one simplified way, the best medicine for fear is preparation and work.
Marion, you got a... Hi. Hello, what's your name again? What do you do here?
Hi, it's Dustin again. I have a question/comment as it relates to fear. So you spoke a lot about fear, but you were already in the moment. You were already in the role, in the job, and then how to deal with fear. What about fear as an indicator? Because I think a lot of times initially when somebody's thinking about a new opportunity in their careers and whether or not they should go for it, they feel fear is uncomfortable, and then they back away from it and convince themselves of all the reasons why they shouldn't go for it. What are your thoughts on that, and maybe the leaders that you've spoken to in terms of, could fear be an indication that actually maybe that's a flag that I should go for it?
as far as your career and working, I mean, this is an interesting question because I think, I think this is probably really common. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be. I think actually studies have shown might be more common in women than it is in men. This is one area that I probably don't fear very much. When Sean Fitzpatrick, Dustin, came to me for this current role that I'm in, I thought I was more than qualified to do it. I thought I was going to crush it. Now I didn't know anything about segment, but I think it was from the previous work. Now I think for people though that look at a role and they're like, I don't know if I could do that. That seems like way too high. Again, my thing was I would go and find people who have done that work before and seek them out. So who are people that could be potential mentors for me that have done some of the things that I want to do? That's probably why so many people come to you to be a mentor. You've got this career path that's kind of rocket ship-like that people want to do, they want to mimic. And so it's, for me, again, and I lean a lot on mentors, I would go and seek out people who I think has done exactly what I want to do and go and follow them and learn from them. Hey, how did you do this? How did you handle the fear when you thought maybe you weren't ready? Because we've probably all heard those quotes, like if somebody offers you a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask what seat, you just get on, right? And so I think that's part of how I would handle that when it comes to a new potential role.
Let me add something to that. I would recommend writing the title of this book down. I saw a bunch of notebooks, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Stephen Pressfield is an author. If everybody remembers the golf movie with Will Smith, Legend of Bagger Vance, right? That was his first published novel. He had been writing for 10 years, making not a single dime before finally getting Bagger Vance published. And that whole book is about that question, right? This notion of the fear that shows up when as soon as you have an instinct of an idea to do something to improve yourself, right? Whether it is a new position or whether it is to write a novel or to get fit, right? Or to go and do some new thing. As soon as you get that, you start getting this fear. He puts a name to it. He calls it the resistance. And the whole book is really a gritty yet eloquent explanation of how the resistance works. It's this never-ending, grinding, it'll lie to you, it'll sweet talk you, it'll cajole you, it'll put a gun to your head, as he puts in the book, to keep you from doing that. And I think, Dustin, your question is precisely the value of this, because what he talks about is, and Seth Godin in Lynchpin talks the same thing, when you start hearing that fear, if you start embracing it and treating it like it's a compass, it's actually pointing you to where you probably should go. Like as soon as you start thinking about that new position and these fears come up and the worse they are, that's probably where you need to go, because that's going to stretch you, it's going to challenge you, it's where the resistance does not want you to go. And that's precisely the kind of places we need people to be pushing their comfort zone to push out. So I really appreciate that question. One other thing, when you talk about dealing with this fear, you talk about the response of preparation, right? And that's a fantastic way of kind of keeping it at bay. It reminds me of Liz Weissman's book, Rookie Smarts, that the reason rookies, whether you're young or old, if you're in a new position and it's probably you're not qualified for it, studies show you actually perform better than people that have been in the role for 20, 30 years, because you're the kind of person who knows they don't know it, and so they seek out the preparation, they find the mentors. One other aspect, though, that I would like to throw up there and have you respond to is the notion of brutal honesty and transparency. And so what I mean by that is, when I came to Lexus, right, it was a complete career change. It was a very, I knew I was going to, I expected to be like a foreign land where I'd have like the book of translation to ask where the bathroom is, right? It was like landing on an alien world where all the laws of physics were different, like completely different. And I remember my very first meeting in Building 7, meeting with the leadership team of the sales managers, and you were in that meeting. And I remember telling you guys, I don't know anything about this. I have no business, sales, or marketing experience or training whatsoever. I don't know anything about this, so I'm going to be learning and I'm going to be, asking, and I will bring to bear what I can. But I remember saying, I don't want to be the guy that comes in telling a bunch of war stories about trials. And it was you who said, that's what you should do. You should be you, right? That's who you are, and that's where you're valuable. So be you, right? Honest about what you don't know, but to be you. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, you came in with, we work in the legal profession, right? We sell to lawyers at that time. That's the area where you were hired to work. Not many of us in this room were lawyers, but we sell to them. We talk to them every day. And I thought, what better than a guy who is a lawyer, has argued with criminal defense lawyers, and has put bad people in jail for life, some really bad people. Those are some cool stories that none of us have. So be you. Use your stories. Use what you have. Use the strength that you have. And everybody can do that. I mean, you have your own unique background that's led to this specific moment in your life. So if you've got these cool stories of, and you've sat and told me a number of them, of some people and some trials, and the way that you prepared for trial, and the way that you work a witness, and the way that you work a jury, all those things are things that we can all learn from. So yes, you got to learn some things over here, but don't discount the fact of all the great things that you've done leading up to this moment, and use that so that you can build at least at some point some credibility for yourself to say, yeah, I've done some big things too, just a little bit different. I've just been identified by a somewhat visionary leader to come in here and work at Lexus now instead of put people in jail.
That advice you gave me that day, and you're kind of expounding on it right now, makes me think of this notion of identity. And I would love to say that we had planned that segue, but that was really, I hadn't heard that before, so it just happened to work great.
Good.
This is a picture I took down at the Cincinnati Museum Center of an art exhibit, The Art of the Brick. If anybody has kids that like Legos, you should take them there. But once you stop marveling at the Legos and you actually start seeing the art that the artist is Nathan Sawaya, I believe is how he pronounces it, Sawaya. There's so many thought-provoking pieces in there, and this was one of them. And it makes me think of, understanding who we are, right? What is the shape we are in? Whether it's our upbringing, the life experiences, the challenges, whatnot. And I know recently you talked at Wright State University to the athletes that were there, and this was your kind of topic, was about identity. So share a little bit with the folks here about the importance of understanding who you are, and in particular, that road, that journey you had to go to and through to get that understanding.
I think one of the most important characteristics in a leader is self-awareness, understanding who you are, and unfortunately, it probably takes some time to do this. My identity was completely tied up in being a football player. From the time I was in second grade through high school, I mentioned in college, that's really all I did was prepare, was work hard to be a professional football player. And so if that becomes your identity, though, you have a big problem, because at some point that's going to go away. And so everybody probably has had certain things that they've done that's become them. And so I talk to my brother AJ about this all the time, because I don't want that to be his identity, and I want him to be known for a lot of other things. And so the majority of our conversations are about things outside of football, so that we're more than just what we do. I spoke with Brady Quinn, another family member, and he said when he moved from playing on the field to up in the broadcast booth, it was like watching the love of his life marry another guy. Powerful, depressed. I was too, the same way. I vividly remember my last college game. It was a really terrible day. I couldn't stop crying for many, many hours before the game, during the game, after the game. It was awful, because I knew that something was probably ending. My identity was, what was I going to do? I don't know. And so you kind of go on this journey of self-awareness that you have to understand who you are. And so I think for me, it's being kind of diverse. It's understanding what you're good at, understanding what you're not, understanding your values, what you care about, your core mission statement, your principles. So I think there's a lot there that identity is. It's imperative that you take time to think about your own personal identity and what you do. It's not just what you do here at Lexus or what you do somewhere else. It's all of you. It's what you embody. And I think I learned this the hard way. And it took many years to do it, though. But I feel I'm in a probably a little bit better space now than I was previously.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've talked about, and I appreciate your willingness to share that,
Yeah.
because it resonates. You know, one of the truths in life is when you have something, a story, an anecdote, an experience, a failure that you think is unique, and you're kind of embarrassed about it or ashamed about it, and you keep it to yourself. When you finally face that fear, right, and put it out there, inevitably somebody says, "I had that same thing. I've been through that same thing," right?
Yep.
And I had that same thing. So, you know, my first 5 or so years as a prosecutor, I was here in Dayton, and I got fired. And all of a sudden, like my whole life, I was working towards, you know, if you asked me, you know, you said I'm an attorney, I would say, no, I'm not. I'm not a lawyer either. I'm a prosecutor, right? I had this like really narrow description of who I was, this very defined self-identity. In fact, I would even joke with people. I'd be like, you know, when God made me, he said, I'm going to make a prosecutor, right? Because that's what I was. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't, right? You know, it's like these shows where these detective shows, and, you know, the hard-charging rogue detective just trying to get justice, and the browbeating, you know, micromanaging sergeant finally pulls their badge and they have to turn it in, and they put it on and they huff out. I had to do that, and it's not like on TV. I sobbed. Yeah. Because my badge was my identity of I was a prosecutor, I was in law enforcement, this is what I had worked for, I was so proud of it. And I had to lay it, actually, I don't know if Justin Evans is here or not, but his mom, I actually put it in her hand. I had to hand it to her, which was a weird thing when I first met him that first day, and he's like, I know who you are. Okay. But I went through almost a year of not just unemployment, but also this real emotional crisis of who am I if I'm not that anymore? And so I really appreciate when we first started talking about your Right State talk, about you being willing to go there in public and say, I went through that, and this is what it felt like. And, you know, let me stir up the conversation and get at least some thinking moving so that you can better prepare yourself, because we all face these at some point or another. You talked to Kat Cole, right? I know one of your absolute favorite leaders. And in particular, when it came to her identity, there was something about her story that not only interested you and intrigued you, but also her openness about her story, her being comfortable in her own skin. Share a little bit of her story, but also that conversation you had with her about that openness.
Kat Cole's a leader I urge you to look up. Katcole, Kat Cole. She is the president of Focus Brands. At 17, she started as a Hooters waitress and decided that her mom was a single mom, didn't have very much money. She needed help. Kat is somebody who is probably my favorite leader that I've spoken with. And she's not the most famous by any means, but probably my favorite because I love the conversation. I've been fortunate that we've continued the dialogue. But at Hooters, when she was working, she noticed that oftentimes certain people would not show up for work, random jobs. And so Kat took it upon herself to learn every single job there was at Hooters: waitress, hostess, cook, manager, open the store, shut down the store. She did so well at this that her bosses came to her and said, Kat, we want to send you to Australia to open up a new Hooters waitress, the first one in Australia. Will you do it? Kat had never been on an airplane to that point. She flies down, she gets her passport, flies down to Australia, opens a restaurant there, crushes it. Goes another part of Australia, opens a restaurant there, crushes it, all over the place. They start sending her all over the world to open restaurants. She goes from being a waitress and a hostess to the head of training, and then eventually was promoted to a vice president role at Hooters. Had not been educated yet, tried to go to school at the same time, ended up having to drop out. Eventually, she did go back and get her MBA without getting an undergraduate, one of the few people who was able to do that, because she got 10 letters of recommendations from some of the most powerful CEOs in the world, including Ted Turner. Incredible story. Kat was then recruited from Hooters. Remember, started as a waitress and then grew all the way through to being a vice president. Recruited by Cinnabon to be their president. Got the job. Then was again promoted again to be the president of Focus Brand, which is over about 7 different restaurants right now where she resides today. I think she'll actually has a chance to be the president of our country someday. I've told her this. I think she's legitimately that impressive as a leader. But one of the things I asked her was how she was able to develop trust when she would go from place to place all over the world, different cultures, different people. I'm like, how do you do that in such a quick period of time? Because when she'd open a store, she'd open it up, get it running, do all the things they need to do, teach everybody so they could do it without her, and then go to the next one and go to the next one. And she did it 20 or so odd times all over the country, different language, all over the world, different languages, everything. And she said, one, I was not scared to tell my whole story. I was very vulnerable with them, and I led with trust. If you lead with trust, people will trust you, and they will listen to you. And so I think she fully understood her identity. She wasn't scared of it. She didn't hide from it. To this day, she doesn't hide from it. When I asked her her whole story, I wasn't sure what she was going to say. I've heard other people talk about her up on stages, and they won't mention she was a Hooters waitress. They think it's demeaning. They think it looks bad. That wasn't Kat. When I talked to Kat directly, she was the one who brought up that because I was afraid to bring it up because I've seen so many other people tell her story and they say she was a waitress at a restaurant, right? They were scared to say it because they thought maybe she'd feel bad. They obviously didn't know her very well. And so I think when you lead with trust, when you lead with your own vulnerabilities, like Kat did, you have a chance to do some incredible things. And when you learn more about her, you'll be even more impressed. But I've learned so much from her, and that's one of the episodes, one of the conversations that I hold dearly because I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it is definitely one of the best that I've listened to. And part of her story, is a kind of not a counterpoint, but certainly an other side to, you mentioned earlier, you used the phrase, I hit the parent lottery, right? That gave you a platform to really focus and improve, right? She starts her story with being the daughter of a single mom.
Yep.
Right? A single mom living in a trailer in Florida. Like, if that isn't headline news, like stereotype, right? But that's where she starts. And she always starts her story there because that's who she is and that's where she's come from. And the battle scars of going through that aren't badges of pride, but they're lessons learned and they're reminders of how she has gotten to where she is. It was a fantastic conversation with her.
Ryan, I want to touch back on your experience at Miami. Being a 4-year starter at Centerville, which is obviously a very accomplished high school football program, and then kind of sitting behind someone at Miami. What was the toughest roadblocks you hit psychologically? And then also, what do you take with you to this day as you look back kind of personally and professionally from that experience?
Well, it was an incredible opportunity. I mean, think about it. I mean, I realize not everybody gets the opportunity to compete every single day with one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. And I did for 2 full years, played golf together, roomed together on the road, had conversations in meetings every day with Ben Roethlisberger. And so looking back now, in the moment, it was a very stressful time every single day because literally he's one of the most competitive people I ever know. I am too. Usually those types of guys are not going to be the best of friends. And so I wouldn't say are great friends. We understood the natural competition. Our coach didn't name the starting quarterback of our team until 2 days before my sophomore year, so the second year, my sophomore year when we were getting ready to go up to play against the University of Michigan. And he eventually named him the starter, and we rotated for a little bit. And so I think I just learned how to deal with really high, stressful situations. I learned how to compete with somebody who was world class. And I also learned what happens when you're not good enough. And I lost that competition. He beat me out. And so I think it's dealing with failure as a kid when you're young in your formative years is really important. I think my wife Miranda and I try hard to do that with our girls. At a young age to let them handle failure. It's important, I think, for people to go through that because today parents are more like helicopters just buzzing around when your kid falls off the bike and trying to scoop them up and things like that. And it's better. And I learned, I think, from my time at Miami I tried everything I could possibly do. I gave everything I had. I moved down there early. I went to every meeting. I lifted weights harder than him. I did all these things, and I still lost. Sometimes it's not enough. And so when that happens, you have to find a way to deal with it. And so for me, I had an opportunity. I was still being recruited by other schools. With the help of my high school coach, Ron Allery, I was able to transfer to Ohio University, where I was able to start for 2 years to be the team captain and have a great career that I'm very proud of. So I think it's understanding that life is probably not necessarily about the times when you get beat down, but like, how am I going to respond to these moments? And that happens here at Lexus all the time too. You're going to get news that you don't like. Dustin's going to say, we have cost challenges, and I'm going to get mad, and I got to figure out how am I going to handle that emotion, right? So I think when these things happen from time to time, I can look back on some of those moments in my life that I've had to deal with failure, where I've done everything at least I think I possibly could, and it still wasn't enough. And it's all about how I decide to respond to those moments.
Real quick, before you ask that question, I want to add something to that, because it reminds me of a story you've shared about the wisdom and the foresight your parents had. I know as growing up, you and AJ both, correct me if I got the story wrong, were always forced to play with older kids.
Right.
Always forced to be stretched, never allowed to be the naturally biggest, fastest, strongest, right? And it's interesting, we talk about chain reactions of impacts, right?
Yeah.
That decision all of a sudden sets you up that when you're now in college and you're in that same situation, it doesn't break you. You've prepared, you've gone through these adversities, and you've been used to being uncomfortable.
I would encourage parents to do the same thing. We played up. So if I was in second grade, we played with the third graders. If you're in third grade, you play with the fourth graders. And I couldn't do it quite as long as AJ was able to do it. But we did play up. So we were forced to play against people who were bigger than us, stronger than us, faster than us, better than us at whatever sport we were playing. And so we used the vehicle of sports to kind of learn through our lives. And then eventually when we played against people our own age, we did pretty well. And so I think it's one way, whether you do that in school or reading groups or athletics, to think about ways to stretch, to push, to go against people that are a little bit older than you when you're a kid. That's one way I think it's certainly helped us be more prepared as we grew up.
Go ahead.
I have a question on the topic of identity. Do you have any tips or ideas for like self-awareness or self-discovery that you kind of practice?
I think, it really helps me to journal every morning and every night. I think some people have different styles of doing that, where they'll just write without lifting their hand off the page for 2 full pages and just write about thoughts that you have, things that you're going through. I also would really urge people who have questions about that to find a really small core group of people that are willing to be brutally honest with you. What am I great at? Where am I not so good? What are some things I can do to get better? And I would find people who have done things that you want to do. So don't just find random people, but literally identify those people. They've done some things that I want to do. And also, again, it's even more important, though, that they're willing to be honest with you and that you respect and appreciate their opinion. And you have regular meetings with those types of people. I think it's helpful. And I found from mentoring others, I learn a ton in those types of conversations, because usually it's with somebody who's probably a little bit younger than me, and they bring this new, fresh perspective. Like, I don't know if David Dowd's in the room, but we had this hour-long conversation, hour-long conversation about me learning about real estate investing when I was he was asking me questions about some leadership things, and I'm learning all, I'm like, wow, and I'm taking notes, and I'm saying, like, we got to do more of this. So I think you'll find, too, if you reach out to try to be mentors to other people, that you got a chance to learn from them as well. So you can learn both from somebody who's done it before you and maybe somebody who wants to do what you want to do.
Hello.
Hello. Fripp.
You brought up an interesting topic, and you passed it very quickly, so I want to go back to it. You mentioned a core mission statement.
Yeah.
We know about mission statements for companies. So my question to you is that something that you're just speaking to generally, or is this something that you personally have put some thought into? You've read, kind of piggybacking off of what she just asked.
Yeah.
After you've identified what's important, you actually write it down, you read it, you go back and revisit it.
I think it's something that would be good to do as a family or an individual. You could probably say, so what do you stand for? Ray Dalio has this great PDF called his Principles. I would take a note to read that. I'll send it to you guys. Anybody who wants to just email me. But he's got his core set of principles that he and his company Bridgewater live by. That it's both. I don't think you can separate personal and professional. you are who you are. So if you leave work and you go and do bad things, you cheat or you steal, you're going to steal here at Lexus. I'm not going to trust people like that. It's the same thing. So your principles and your mission statement, they are who you are. So regardless of whether I wouldn't say at work I'm going to be this and at home I'm going to be this. You're the same person. So I think when it comes to having a mission statement, it's to maybe sit down and really analyze what you want to do, or analyze what you stand for, some of your principles. And absolutely, I'm a big believer in writing down my thoughts on a regular basis. Certainly that's a really important one. Or to write your own principles and even potentially publish it too so that other people can see it.
The recent episode with Clay Hebert, I believe was, all about, it was interesting listening to him walk you through this exercise of reducing that notion of a mission statement for yourself down to a single sentence.
Yeah.
Which I love, because we think of corporate mission statements and it's usually a paragraph and subpointed and maybe it goes on to page 12 and it loses all its meaning. But this very simple, I think his formula is like, I help blank do blank, right? Or different verb, right? It's a great episode. I think it's like 100 episode
99.
99.
Yeah.
Is there another question?
Ryan, can you touch on what you're discussing with Kat Cole and leading with trust? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, I think we've all been around leaders who you can tell are trustworthy people. The Cubbies talk a lot about the speed of trust. I think when people don't trust others, and this has probably happened in a number of places, it's happened from time to time here at Lexus, when you don't trust the leader, things are very slow. And when a leader trusts his people, things can go very fast, meaning making decisions, making changes, projects being greenlit, all these things. We've probably been on both sides of things where, and I try to do this, I think, James, you see when in some of the things that we implement in our segment of the business. If somebody will come to me and say, hey, I have an idea, I'm going to lead with trust with that person because I hire the people, I trust the people that we hire. And I hope they can trust me. So if they come to me with a good idea, we can greenlight that sometimes in a matter of minutes or hours, when in the past maybe it would have taken a month. And so I think when you lead with trusting the people that you work with and they trust you, things can happen so fast and we can innovate and do new and better ways of doing things because we trust each other to do it right. Now, I would prefer to lead with trust and get burned from time to time by untrustworthy people, as opposed to leading with a cynical viewpoint of the world to say everybody's out to get me or they're going to do bad things. I've been burned, certainly, we all have, but I would prefer to live that way versus the other way, which unfortunately I don't like working with leaders who lead with cynicism or think people or just expect others to do bad things. I expect them to do good things. I expect them to be trustworthy, good people. And most of the time, you end up having a much better and enjoyable experience, I think, living that way.
I think there's an interesting kind of connection between your question, James, and what was your name again? Yep. Marina? Did I get that right? Between your question, Marina, and James, right? Which is, it isn't just about saying, I trust my people, right? It's about self-reflection. And are my actions actually exhibiting trust, right? So if I say I trust my people, but then my actions say I need to check this and you need to check with me, I don't trust you, right? I could say what I want. I don't trust you, right? And I think the key I want to highlight that you said that I want to make sure it doesn't get missed is the notion of not leading with trust as I'm a leader and I trust. Leading with trust as in I go first. Right? Too often we get, and especially if there's been a history, there's been arguments and battles before, and we hold on to, what happened before, and we get into a posture of saying, I've been burned too many times, I'm happy to trust them, but I'm going to be on my guard. They've got to show that they're trustworthy, right? Well, if you go through life saying you've got to show you're trustworthy, you are exuding a aura of, I don't trust you. The leader, the responsibility of the leader, and Kat Cole really talked just eloquently about doing this, is you start with trust. You prime the pump. You put it out there. And that inspires and pulls people, and then they start trusting you, and it creates a flywheel. But it's about understanding yourself as a leader, doing more than just talking, really thinking about what you're doing and doing it first. And I would really like to pick up on your question, Marie, because it actually was a great segue to priority, right? You asked, I know it's like a plant, right? This is political town hall. It's a spontaneous question. You asked, how do you develop this self-awareness? And I know from talking with you, Ryan, I think you'll agree that that's done in quiet times, doing thinking, right? Thinking about these things. And in order to do that, we're going to talk about priority, right? There's this, and especially we all feel this in Lexus. There is a what's the phrase you use? The crush of
stuff.
The crush of
like
stuff,
Right.
Keith, right? That there's all this. I love this photo, this image, right? Of the entire ocean of stuff is bearing down on us, and if we don't build a wall to keep it at bay, to create a space to literally stop and think rather than do, we'll never get there. So let me ask you, Ryan. I know you talk a lot about sifting through the urgent versus the important. In fact, Dustin mentioned it at the beginning.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about the importance of doing that, but more specifically, how do you do it?
This is really tough because especially when you work at a big company and there are oftentimes meeting notices flying your way and you're supposed to accept every single one of them and show up and be there. And that's the crush of stuff. I mean, that's what happens. So a lot of time there's two different types of work you can do. And there's a great author by the name of Cal Newport who wrote a book called Deep Work. There's shallow work and there's deep work. And most of us, most of the time, unless we consciously think about this, do shallow work. So we go to meetings, we show up, we nod, we take the notes, and then we go back to our desk, and then we go to the next meeting, and then we join the conference call, and then we do that all day, and then we go home. And we're like,
email.
A lot of email. A lot of email. I would prefer to break my days up with deep work, 90-minute blocks of all these blocks. So Chase Jarvis, the CEO of Creative Live, an incredible company, a guy who's built this company over the last 6 years into $1 billion company. Is also a world-famous photographer. But Chase breaks his days up into 90-minute blocks. The first 60 minutes are the necessary meetings that you have to have in the second, and then the 30 minutes left. Every time, without fail, he will not let anyone take that time from him. So it's 90-minute blocks. It's hard to do this because we're not the CEO of this company. So there are some meetings that we just have to be at. I get that. But it's finding a way to be intentional about blocking out your day to spend time in deep work so that you can think. You can write thank you notes. You can read. You can listen to podcasts. You can listen to books on tape. You do all of these things maybe during your time so that you have time to innovate, to be creative, to think of new ideas. If you're spending all day doing shallow work and just going to meetings and not really thinking, we will never innovate. We'll never get better. We'll never leave our mark here at Lexus. And the point is we want everybody in this room to spend at least portions of every single day in deep work so they can think about ways to get for both to get better as a professional and individual, as well as to help our company get better. That's the point of us being here, so that we can all find a way to leave our mark. But I promise it will not happen if you just go about your day going from meeting to meeting to meeting, doing a bunch of shallow work.
You know, it's interesting. One of the books we have up here is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. I think I've got that right, McKeown?
He's from England, yeah, it's weird.
Oh, well then, I'm not even going to try. And he talks about actually this word, priority, that its origins is from like the 1400s. And for 500 years, it was always a singular word, priority. You have a priority. And sometime around the early 20th century, it got pluralized. So now we have priorities, which is an oxymoron. And it reminds me of, and I might get myself a little bit in trouble, but it reminds me of it's not Dustin's fault. She had to go to it. It was shallow work for her. But she had to go to, there was a senior leadership kind of development thing. And what was it, 33 leadership priorities. Right. It reminds me of actually one of the things she said at the beginning, that as you go through your day and you try to this shallow work, and just so we're clear, we're not. I know we've talked. We're not talking about shallow work as in worthless, right? These are the things that make things happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the idea in Cal Newport's book is that shallow work are those tasks that don't require a lot of focus. They don't require a lot of time. They don't require all of your skills brought to bear. Those things you have, your assets, versus deep work, focus, concentration, time, and your real talents, right? Meetings, emails, calls, shallow. And he was actually on a podcast, and he said, and this is kind of a provocative statement, but he said, you do enough shallow work, and only enough shallow work to keep from getting fired, so that you can then go have the time to do the deep work to get promoted. Because the shallow work that you can create, I call it like a heat signature of activity. You're the guy, if you're always at the meetings and you're always on the calls and you always have, something to add, and if there's an email thread that comes through, you're always there to participate and, kind of add your 2 cents. Let's be honest, that's a pretty decent career move, right? Because you become known as a person who's always there, always participating.
Except for the reply all. You got to stop there with the reply alls. Don't reply all, ever. Just reply to the person who needs to hear it, plus whoever else. Not like 95 people. That's my only pet peeve. People have noticed I've never replied all in my career in the 11 years at Lexus. No.
It is my goal to get you to reply all.
Don't do it. If there's 4 people, that doesn't count, because sometimes that happens. But I'm talking if there's 80 of them, just don't do it. Like, I promise.
So... But if you're going to follow this path of priority, of building a wall, of walling off some time to do some deep work, you're going to take a risk. You're risking having other people develop an opinion of you, right? In fact, you joked about it, right, earlier, that you're the guy that doesn't like to go to meetings, right?
Certain meetings.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I don't think certain was the adjective when it was first talked about, right? I don't think that was your adding to it. Like, no, just certain meetings. But you have to risk that. And there's a gamble. Because if your goal is to get ahead, the heat signature of activity will work. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about making an impact. And if it's making an impact, you've got to go do deep work, which is a gamble, and it's a bet on yourself to say, when I unplug from some of this shallow work and I'm not there and I'm not at that meeting and I'm not on that call and the email never gets my 2 cents, even though it goes down, 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 and I risk people thinking something, I'm gambling that when I come back to the surface out of my laboratory of deep work, I bring something of value that was worth it. Yep. And if you will gamble on yourself and go do that, all of a sudden we start having people show up to these shallow work meetings with these massively valuable ideas that Dustin was talking about at the beginning.
Yep.
Question.
Yes.
Yep.
When you share your story and Lance shares his, you
Tanola,
talk a little
right?
bit about, I'm sorry.
There's Tanola. Okay, cool.
You talked a little bit about when you left football, and Lance talked about when he was fired as a prosecutor. Who you used to self-identify with and the process that you went through to become the leader that you are today and ultimately who you were designed to be. Can you speak to that process a little bit?
That might take a while. I think that's
There's a lawyer up here. It will take a while.
unfortunately, I think it can be a long process, but I think it takes a lot of time and self-reflection. It takes time to sit and really understand what I'm all about and who I want to surround myself with and learn from as well. So I don't know if I have a specified blueprint of the best way to do that. I've been declined for certain leadership programs here at Lexus multiple times, and every time they seem to tell me that the reason I can't be in it is just because you are too young or you're not experienced. And initially when I was told that, I would always be really mad and want to curse the people who made those decisions of why they wouldn't allow me to be in a leadership development program, or I remember the MLP, the Maximizing Leadership Performance, and I got turned down from that twice, and they just said you simply need to mature, you need time. And I think that was, looking back now as maybe I've matured a little bit, they were exactly right. sometimes it just takes a little bit of time and self-reflection and being intentional with your actions to self-reflect, to understand, to be self-aware, to understand what you're all about, and to, again, I think I mentioned it earlier, to find people to surround yourself with that can be brutally honest with you on the things that you're good at, but also the things that you need to work on.
And I think from my experience, beyond what Ryan said there was just absolutely true. For me personally, there were two other sources. One was my faith, right? Because when the external is taken away, whatever that looks like inside, that's where I had to go. My external identity, the external value I had, the external respect that I would get because I went into a courtroom and Tripp, I need your voice for this one. I was the state of Ohio, right? All of Ohio is sitting right here, right? And all that was gone. And so finding what was inside that mattered was a big piece. And I got a really wise wife who is unafraid to push me. And, especially during that first year of, being unemployed and really being, depressed, lost, there were two things. She never once said, "When are you getting a job?" Never once. God, I don't know how she didn't, right? Never once. So absolute support, but also pushing me. So especially once I came here and I'm going through this transition of, I used to think leadership was I don't want to be somebody's boss, and now I'm, the duck on the curb, falling down because I don't know anything and all these other things. And I'm having to struggle with this notion of I used to know exactly what to do to succeed. I knew the ground rules of the courtroom and I could pick up a trial and I could go. And now I don't know anything. I don't know what ROI is. I hear it a lot, don't have any clue what it means, right? And I remember her not constantly, but regularly saying, well, you're supposed to be the leader. So, right, you need to. So finding people, especially as you're trying to sort this out, and you talked about this, but finding people you can trust and finding something of substance that's in you that's not tied to something external that can be removed, I think are critical to do some thinking about, to go back to your question, about who you are. Does that help? Okay.
Bridget?
Yeah, Ryan. So you said that you started coming out of college, started at LexisNexis. Now, you said that when you wanted to be a leader. You were too young, not experienced, not mature enough. That's the situation that I'm in currently. How did you go about that to get that experience, to gain that maturity, to become the leader where you are today?
One of the questions I asked the vice president of sales at the time was, who's the best? I want to go learn from them. And he mentioned a guy, Aaron Campbell, and said, he's the best. He's the guy. Go, if you follow and do what he does, you have a good opportunity, a good chance to be good. And I tried to model myself after him. So having that, so I think, again, finding the mentor for me was critical. And because you've got to, in order, if you're looking to get promoted or get into these programs, let's face it, if you work in sales, you've got to produce. And it doesn't matter who you are when it comes to selling. They always say they draw the line at the beginning of the year and there's a line at the end of the year, and you got to go and run through that line. And whatever you did prior to coming here, it seriously doesn't matter. Nothing matters. It matters now that you're here and you have the exact same opportunity as 85 others who are trying to do the exact same thing that you are doing. So what a great opportunity for you to be the best, right? Find the best, surround yourself with the best, learn from them, invest, spend extra time, produce, and be a performer. Be known as somebody who's the Dave Shelby-like, the top of the stack rankings, the Aaron Mirandos of the world. Those types of people, they're the best. So we want to go to them. We want to seek them out. And so some of the ways to do that is to seriously just be a performer and to produce, especially in the profession of sales, which is great because it's one of the most fair professions in the world. It's very competitive, and it seriously doesn't matter where you came from. And all that matters is where you are at the start and where you end when the year is over.
Curiosity is literally part of your brand, right? I mean, on your website for Learning Leader, or at learningleader.com, you have, are you massively curious, right? We've all heard the phrase, a very cynical, maybe not cynical, but really cautious phrase, right? The curiosity killed the cat. And yet, through your interviews, Kat Cole lists curiosity as one of the 4 critical elements of sustained excellence, really balancing it out. You've talked to Dan Pink, right, who's the author of Drive and To Sell Is Human, and he talks about, again, curiosity. He described it as the people who are successful are the ones who follow their noses.
Yeah.
Whitney Johnson, another author of Disrupt Yourself that you interviewed, she talked about curiosity being critical as the thing that we use when we climb a learning curve to find the next learning curve to climb up, and that's how we continue to develop.
Yep.
And then lastly, again, Seth Godin, when you interviewed him, he talked about his success coming down to just, he notices things. He's curious about what's going on, and he notices things. So talk for us a little bit about, in particular, what curiosity means to you, what it has meant to you, its place in your development as a leader and as somebody who is obviously making an impact.
It's one of the most important, if not the most important qualities I look for in another person that I want to spend time around. Do they think? Do they ask the question why? Are they always looking for new and innovative ways to do things? I struggle to want to spend time around people who just kind of mosey through life, blending into the walls, as you and I have talked about. And unfortunately, there's people out there who like that, who are okay just to kind of wake up, go through their day, go to bed, and do it all over in the next day. I want people to occasionally have highs, have lows, always be questioning everything. As Dustin mentioned, I said it before, tipping the sacred cows, thinking of ways that your organization does something and say, is there a better way? And so that's why when I'm looking for somebody, a candidate to work here at Lexus, are they curious? Do they ask questions? It's one of the most important time if anyone ever interviews with me, and some in the room have, the most important part of the interview process for me when I'm interviewing somebody else is the questions they ask me. I love it when they start interviewing me. I love it when they don't wait till the end. They start asking questions about Lexus or about me or about us right away or throughout, or they'll stop and say, oh, I got a question about that, because it shows they're curious. They think. Those people have a much better opportunity to be successful than the ones who just sit there and answer your questions.
Now, I didn't intend to do this, but it's 1:25, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to skip one of our topics here, which was about high jumping. We were going to discuss, the technique you used as a metaphor for climbing the ladder, right? But we're going to skip that because I want to get to this next one. This is a screenshot from the Huffington Post, the business section, which published recently it was actually, just a couple weeks ago now, an article you wrote about your quest to get Seth Godin. This is actually my screenshot. It's a dead giveaway because I was shopping at the NFL shop down here. And so Google Ads is now littering me with more opportunities to buy more Broncos jerseys. But I saw this and was shocked because this is one of the most trafficked news and opinion spaces in the world. And so I texted you. It was like 9:30 at night or something. I texted you and I just simply said, I just saw this on HuffPost. How did this happen? And you responded not with words. You responded with a link to a video, which I'm going to play here in a second. And then nothing else. So I clicked on the link and I'm watching on my phone and this is what I found.
No, I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old. And he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. With people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
apart from noticing that I guess he was in high school as a 12-year-old, talk to us, explain to them, again, how did this happen, getting on HuffPo? And two, what was this video, why was this your response to how did this happen?
Well, one, that video has a big effect on me. I wanted to be published on the Huffington Post. I want to regularly be published on the Huffington Post. It's a site that I read. I know there's millions of people from all over the place read it. So why not aim at the very top to have my work published as opposed to aiming in the middle or at the bottom? And I'm probably in this room like the 120th best writer, maybe, in this room of people. But that, I don't care. I mean, I still want it published out there. And so I thought, what would be the best possible way to get my work published on the Huffington Post? And I said, okay, who is the person who makes all the decisions at the Huffington Post? It's Arianna Huffington, right? So why don't I find Arianna Huffington's email and write her an email and tell her why she should publish my work? Because you have to ask. So what's the worst that could happen? One, Arianna doesn't read it. She deletes it. She has somebody else that does all that for her, and they don't reply. So I wrote her what I think was a compelling note. I shared with her a little bit of my work, in addition to the body of the email of what I thought was compelling. And about 4 hours later, she wrote me back and said, Ryan, this is great. Thank you so much. In fact, so I'm CCing our top editor, and she is going to set you up with an ID and a password to be a regular writer for the Huffington Post whenever you want. And I said, that's awesome. That's cool. And so it just goes to show you it's the same thing with everything and anything that you want to do. And I'm glad Dustin brought this up at the very beginning. You've got to speak up. You've got to ask. You've got to try. Because what's the worst that's going to happen? Arianna Huffington deletes my email. That happens every day to me. People delete them all the time.
You're deleting a lot of people's emails.
Well, yeah. I mean, we all do. I mean, so I think, think about that for anything that you're going to do in your life. So if I really want to do something, I'm going to go as high as I possibly can to that person, right, and say, can we do this? You know, Seth Godin, or before a podcast had even published, or whoever, my heroes of the world, Elon Musk, trying to weave my way down that tough maze. Whoever it may be, my heroes, to say, let's do this. Let's find a way to make this happen because I want to learn from you. And then, yes, you do have to be somewhat compelling. If we want to get tactical, we could get into it. But the primary point and the purpose of us talking about this is you must speak up. You must ask. At least give it a shot. You'll be shocked to see what could possibly happen if you do. And for me, maybe Arianna Huffington replies. And I guarantee you, like I said, there's better writers in here. Other people could do the exact same thing. I just thought, why not give it a shot and see what happens?
One thing I want to make clear, because you've talked a lot on your podcast, you've self-identified as being an introvert.
Yeah.
Right? So I want to make sure we're clear. You're not advising, this isn't advice just for extroverts. This isn't advice for type A, gregarious, lawyers who like to talk a lot in public places kind of advice, right? So talk a little bit about how you take this introverted nature and you go over here and cold call people and email them and knock on their door and never take no. And when they say no, your response, because you've told me, so when can we get that done, right? And then putting that on the air and putting it out there and sitting up here and going to places like Wright State while being an introvert. How does that happen?
Growth will only happen if you push and find ways to get outside of your comfort zone. I remember sitting at Laura Hussman's cube. We were making calls together, and I saw this little sign that said, you know, like where the magic happens, and then you have a circle with your comfort zone, and it's all out there, right? So the only way you grow is to push yourself outside of where I'm comfortable not speaking up, actually. Comfortable not public speaking. I'm comfortable not talking in meetings with big groups of people. I don't really like to network. I'm not very good at that. I'm good at having, I think, one-on-one conversations from time to time. But I knew for me to grow, I have to push myself to do those things. And so part of the reason why I started a podcast is because I wanted to be better at speaking in front of a group. Well, why not force myself to talk on a microphone to a really smart person knowing I'm going to release that for the world to hear me potentially sound like an idiot. It forces me to do those things. And so I've kind of self-imposed that pushing of getting outside of my comfort zone to say, this could hopefully make me better in a number of areas where I'm probably not as good as I'd like to be. Because my dad's always told me you get a disproportionate amount of credit if you can get up in front of a group and give a great talk. Even if you're not that good, you can kind of get some credit for it. And so I thought, well, I'd like to be good and I'd like to be able to speak in front of people. And so I think that's why there's this self, like I said, imposed forcing of pushing myself outside of where I'm comfortable.
Yeah, and it brings to mind some of the things we've already talked about, right? As soon as you get outside that comfort zone, that resistance shows up and the fear shows up, and then you have to dial into it and you sit and think about it for a second and you fine tune to where it's going and you go in that direction. But because you're afraid, like you said before, it drives you to prepare and it drives you to own everything about the thing you're about to do. I've lost count of the number of times that your guests, and these are guests, for those that haven't listened, it spans from Navy SEALs to the CEO of a $4 billion company, New Balance, to Jim Tressel, to people in best-selling authors and speakers, and all along the gamut. And I keep hearing them say, "Boy, that's a really great question," or Seth Godin, I didn't even remember saying that. Where did you wrote it. It's in this book on this page. Like your preparation just exudes through these conversations. And so I think it's interesting here at the end of this conversation to really see how the drive to speak up kind of ties all of these things in together.
Absolutely. And I have one story that I want to share to finish. And Lance, thank you so much for doing this, by the way. Give a round of applause for Lance, please. Thank you. So you see Apple, you're probably thinking about Steve Jobs and someone who put their dent in the universe. And I'm actually going to read this story because it's really important to get it all right. But this story is not about Steve Jobs. This story is about Donna Dubinsky. I'm going to tell it real quick. It's 1985. Donna Dubinsky was just shy of 30 years old. She was Apple's distribution and sales manager. She was working virtually nonstop from morning until bedtime. She was focused on shipping computers to keep up with the explosive demand. Suddenly, Steve Jobs proposed eliminating all 6 U.S. warehouses, dropping their inventory, and moving to a just-in-time production system in which computers would be assembled upon order and overnighted by FedEx. Donna Dubinsky thought this was a colossal mistake, one that could put the company's entire future at stake. Distribution was working very well in the current state, she insisted. Her team was coming off a record quarter and complaints were virtually non-existent. Even though she was the master of her domain, Steve Jobs overruled her. Eventually, she was assigned to the task force that spent months reviewing Steve Jobs' proposal for the just-in-time system. Jobs had the power and the majority following. Donna Dubinsky was in the minority. Should she speak up and challenge the famously hot-headed founder, or should she stay quiet and keep him happy? She elected to speak up. She stood her ground. She explained to her boss that if she didn't get 30 days to create her own counterproposal, she would leave Apple. She developed a great proposal for consolidating customer service centers rather than moving to just-in-time production, which would gain some of the desired benefits without the risk. Her proposal was accepted. What got her heard, in her words, was output and impact. People saw me as somebody who could make things happen. If you become known as someone who delivers, you do your job and you do it well, you build respect. From the outside looking in, what Donna Dubinsky did looked like career suicide. However, given Steve Jobs' disagreeable tendencies, he was exactly the type of person who could be confronted. Dubinsky knew that Jobs respected people who were willing to stand up to him and people who had an open mind to new ways of doing things. By virtue of her willingness to challenge an idea she viewed as wrong, she landed a promotion. In fact, because of this, starting in 1981, the Macintosh team had begun granting an annual award to one person who challenged Steve Jobs. and jobs promoted every single one of them to run a division at Apple. My point in sharing this story, I absolutely believe that everybody in this room has a Donna Dubinsky story in them. It is on you to speak up. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it, guys.